Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. I'm so glad you're here. Today I'm going to make a new bunting for my dining room, and I'm starting with this 8-ounce canvas drop cloth. I've gotten a lot of use out of this drop cloth. It's huge, and we're going to cut our triangles for the bunting out of this drop cloth to start. I want to make something coastal. I still have my Peter Rabbit bunting hanging in my dining room, and it's time to replace that. And as you know, I love jeans for a coastal look, so I will be using old pairs of jeans for this. But we are going to start with this drop cloth as our background pieces. I'm using the same pattern that I used for the Peter Rabbit bunting. So this is a triangle with a 2.5-inch high rectangle on top. That's going to be folded over, and we'll thread our cord through that. And a 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way around the rectangle and the triangle. And I'm going to do the same number of these pennants as I did for the Peter Rabbit bunting, so that's 7 of these pennants. I already made one, that's my prototype, so I made that one slightly differently. I will show you both. It's all basically the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut these pennants out of the drop cloth, ironing it so that it's completely flat and cutting, and you can see that I alternate the way I lie the pattern so that I get the most out of the fabric. Now once those are all cut out, I'm going to fold over the 1/4-inch seam along the edges, not the top because that's going to get folded down, but along each of the edges. And I'm going to start by just folding and pressing that with my fingernail and snipping at that intersection of the triangle part and the rectangle part at the top. Just a little snip so that I can fold it over itself, and trimming the bottom so that I get a nice point at the bottom. And then I'm going to press that with an iron. Now I am going to sew this, but you could do this as a no-sew project. So you could use some kind of glue, such as ModPodge, or a fabric glue, like Aleen's fabric glue. Or you could use a seam binding double-sided tape to attach this down. I'm going to sew a zigzag stitch all the way around this, just using white thread. And I've set the stitch width to 6.5 millimeters, so it basically covers that entire 1/4-inch seam plus over the edge of the fabric. And then once those seams are all done, I'm just going to fold down that top rectangle, fold it down on the back, and press that so that it's nice and flat. And then I'm just going to sew with a straight stitch just along the bottom of that. So very simple. And now that we have our 7 pennants all ready to be decorated, I'm going to start thinking about what sort of patterns I want to put on them. And I want to tell you that my first idea was to do nautical flags. I've done nautical flag projects in the past with jeans. I really do like nautical flags, you know, the nautical alphabet, but I thought I would try to do something a little bit more, I don't know, flowy and organic here. And I'm going to do a different design for each of the pennants, so I'll tell you about these designs and how I put them down. And if you think any of them are successful, then please copy my designs, but if you do other designs, I would love to hear about them. So what I'm going to do is basically trace around the pennant on a piece of scrap paper and then try to sketch out a design, bearing in mind that I'm going to be cutting the pieces out of the jeans fabric, so I want to keep it relatively simple. So starting with my prototype, basically what I've sketched out here is just sort of waves, and I'm thinking of waves when you're really far out in the ocean and they just are sort of slow rolling waves. And I just want to cut those waves out of different colors of jeans fabric. I have some really old double-sided fusible interfacing here. It's probably almost 30 years old, and part of it seems to be disintegrating. So I used this on this prototype only, and then I ordered some more interfacing for the others. This one has a paper backing, and I really prefer that for a project like this because you can trace your pattern onto the paper backing. So I traced the pattern upside down onto the backing, and then I cut that out and fused it to the wrong side of the jeans. Now you would just follow the manufacturer's directions for doing that. Generally, you're going to use moist heat and hold it in place for about 15 seconds. When you have an interfacing with a paper backing, obviously you don't use moist heat for that step, just get it adhered to the fabric. So I then cut it out of the jeans and then put it down onto the pennant. I wanted to get all of my pieces into place before I fused any of them down, and this also allows for me to make adjustments in how they fit together. So there's a little bit of blank space or negative space at the top of this, and then the 3 pieces which are curved. And again, I was thinking of sort of rolling waves with this one. Now for the second one, you can probably guess that my inspiration is sort of an octopus. So this is as if we were seeing just a little piece of an octopus swim by. Now this interfacing does not have paper backing. I ordered this off of Amazon.com, and I'm sorry to say that it came with a sort of a musty smell, so I'm not going to link this interfacing. If I find a good interfacing, well, the next time I use it, I'll link it. But at first I tried to trace the pieces onto the interfacing and use it sort of as if it had a paper backing, and I tried to iron them on using some parchment paper, and that just really didn't work. So with this interfacing, which doesn't have a paper backing, what you really need to do is sandwich it between the 2 pieces of fabric and then iron. And I found it worked with, again, the moist heat at 15 seconds. So what I did after this one is I cut out a triangle of the interfacing and put it over the pennant. And then I cut out my pieces of jeans and laid them on top of that triangle and pressed them down gently, because you have to be careful not to touch any bits that are sticking over the edge with your iron. And then I trimmed it all down and then pressed it really well. Now the inspiration for this third one would be something like seagrass that is just sort of moving with the currents of the water. And I'm going to cut the seagrass in the background out of 2 different colors of jeans. This fourth one is another sort of wave inspiration, but I wanted to have more waves for this one. So it's just going to be more colors and smaller pieces. And for this one, to have some variation in the jeans, I found this one part of one of the pairs of jeans that I have, which is really wrinkled, and so it gives the fabric a real look of texture. I got it flat with the iron, but you can see where all the wrinkles were in it, and I just loved the way that looked. Now here I have some of my scraps. I've saved all of the scraps as I've done this, and I was somewhat inspired by the shape of these scraps. So for this one though, instead of just using sort of random scraps, I took that shape, which looks a little bit like some seaweed that we often see washed up on the beach. And I just did a somewhat repetitive pattern with that sort of almost eye shape. And I thought that actually had a sort of a modern look. If I had been really careful to measure it out and have it all exactly the same, it would, I think, have a modern look or a tiled look. But I wasn't that careful. I stayed with my organic feeling to it and just sort of sketched it by hand. Now for this next one, I have these jeans, and I think these were the first jeans that I ever took apart and started crafting with. And I had taken the pockets off of these, and where the pockets were, I have this sort of ombre effect. So I thought I would try to translate that ombre look to the pennant. So it did take some careful cutting and fitting together, but I was able to get the pennant to look like it went from dark down to light, sort of naturally on the jeans. And then for this last one, I did an ombre look, but going the other direction. And this wasn't naturally in the jeans. I just took pieces of jeans that I had. There was the one piece with some of the natural ombre, but mostly I just went from light jeans down to dark jeans. But then I took some inspiration from some of my leftover pieces, and I cut little pieces almost like spray or water droplets that are coming up off of the water, and just sort of put them over the blue parts in the white part. Those were a little bit tricky to iron on because I had to be careful not to touch the interfacing that's around the pieces. But what I ended up doing was putting down some parchment, and the parchment just attached to the interfacing that was around these and removed it from the pennant. So it actually worked pretty well. So my prototype is just at the very top of the screen there because I've already started to do a little bit more work on it. But here are the other 6 pennants, and I like simple things. I like the way they look as they are, but I do think they could use a little bit more. So I'm going to use white macrame cord and some brown jute twine. I happen to get both of these at the Dollar Tree, but you can get them anywhere. And I'm going to add a little decoration to each of these pennants. Now to do that, on my prototype I did try the Aleen's fabric glue, but where I accidentally could see some of that glue, it's glossy. And then I tried just regular matte ModPodge, and that worked much better. So I'm going to be using matte ModPodge to glue these pieces down. But because the macrame cord frays, and because the jute twine is very stiff and it doesn't like to mold into the shapes I want it to mold into, I'm also going to mix up just some white glue and water to soak the pieces, or at least parts of the pieces, before I put them on the pennants. So that means that some of them may not glue down properly at first, but once they've started to dry and stiffen, then I can glue them down with the matte ModPodge if they're not sticking completely. So for my first pennant, my prototype, I want to have just sort of swirls of white. I'm just thinking of the white caps of ocean waves, but I want them throughout the pennant. And then for the top, I want to use jute twine to represent sand and the sort of shapes that get traced into sand by, for example, beach grass that's being blown by the wind, or the trails that different animals make. So I'm just going to twist that into different shapes. But again, it's very hard to use that twine if it isn't soaked. So I had started that without soaking, and now I'm going to finish it by soaking the twine before I try to apply it. And here you want to be careful because you've got that top sort of tube where you're going to be putting the cord through to hang the bunting. You just want to be careful not to glue that to itself or to make it too stiff. Now for the one with the repetitive pattern that sort of looks like eyes, I thought that they also somewhat resembled fish. So I'm going to use the white macrame cord to do a sort of stylized fish on every other one of those, and facing in opposite directions. So not really a school of fish, but just sort of stylized fish, going from the top down to the bottom. And as the fish got smaller, I had more and more trouble getting them to keep their shape. So I put this on my small wool ironing mat and just sort of held them in place with some straight pins while it dried. Now for the pennant with many layers of ocean color, I'm going to cut a lot of pieces of macrame cord and then sort of paint the top with the ModPodge and roll the pieces of macrame cord once I've soaked them into swirls. And I just want this to be just sort of like seafoam at the top of this ocean. Now for the one with the sort of grass, what I ended up deciding to do with this one is cut pieces of the jute twine that would stretch from the top of the pennant to the bottom. And because the jute twine has been wrapped itself into a ball, it's sort of has a natural curve to it. So I decided to let this stand away from the pennant with the natural curve. So I just cut the pieces and then glued them together at the bottom and glued them to the top. For my ombre ocean, I also did some white swirls, but I have a lot more space at the top. So I didn't put them all together. I let them sort of space out and be of different sizes. Now for my ocean with the droplets sort of flying off of the water, what I decided to do was cut small pieces of the macrame cord and just put them on the tops of the droplets as if they were, I'm thinking, just sort of light. And then I used more small pieces, so sort of like dashes, and put them over the lines of the different colors of jeans that I have, sort of the different depths of the ocean. Again, I'm thinking of light reflecting off of tiny waves. And finally, for my stylized octopus, I thought I would use some jute twine and put it into the dark places that are around the octopus. I did not want to give the octopus features. I wanted to highlight the area around the octopus and leave the octopus a little bit more to the imagination. So I just let all of those dry, and as they were drying, if needed, I would squish them a little bit or press them into place. And then there's going to be a little bit of maintenance necessary to make this perfect. So in some places, I just let the cords hang off the edge of the pennant. So now that it's mostly dry, I'm going to trim those. The macrame cord, especially if it's thick and messy, I tapered the ends of it with scissors, trimmed and tapered. And then a lot of the cords, especially ones I had to soak, I had to glue down again with the ModPodge now that they had dried some. Now, as this was drying too, once I had everything sort of finalized, trimmed, and glued, I ironed it a little bit too to further dry it and hold it in place. Now I have the, I think it's 9 or 9.5 foot nautical rope from the Dollar Tree here, and I'm just going to feed that through the tops of the pennants. I found the easiest way to do that was to put a large safety pin through the end, and then it just pushed through more easily. It just for some reason the rope itself isn't quite stiff enough to push through easily, but if you add a safety pin, you really don't have to do anything except push it through. I left about 6 to 8 inches between each of the pennants and a little bit more space on either end. Now to finish this off, I have this lace ribbon. I'm not sure what else to call it except lace ribbon. I feel like it looks like seaweed, so I like it for nautical projects. And I have this green one, actually looks sort of like moss, that I got from the Dollar Tree. And I have this blue one that I got from Amazon. And what I'm going to do is cut about 21-inch lengths of each of these, and then I'm cutting the green one in half down the middle so it's thin. I'm going to tie the 2 of these around the rope between each of the pennants. And just for a little extra interest, on every other one, I'm going to add one of these white starfish from the Dollar Tree. You could or could not add this, depending on how you feel. You could also add, I think, pearls, like glue pearls, into the lace ribbon, or shells. I just happen to use these white starfish from the Dollar Tree. So to get the starfish to stay on the rope, I used a little bit of silver florist's wire. I cut it and I wrapped it sort of in an X around the middle of the starfish. And then I did stick the starfish's arms through the lace ribbon to make it look as if it was in the seaweed. And here's the final bunting. I would love to know what you think of this, if you had a favorite pennant or how you would make the pennants, what sort of designs you would like to put on them or put between them. Please tell me in the comments. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.